Hello everyone, this is John Aristotle Phillips with PredictIt. In the next half hour or so, I'll be talking with Dr. Stephen Gjerstad, a prominent prediction market researcher. If you have any questions during the webinar, please comment below. Dr. Gjerstad is the Presidential Fellow Professor at Chapman University's Economic Science Institute. He holds a bachelor's in mathematics, as well as a master's and a PhD in economics, all from the University of Minnesota. Before coming to Chapman, Dr. Gjerstad was a research scientist at the University of Arizona's Economic Science Laboratory and was part of the research and technical staffs at IBM and Hewlett-Packard, respectively. Stephen, in a prediction market, first of all, tell us, what do you focus on in your research regarding prediction markets?
Well, one of the papers that I wrote on that was dealing with the question of risk aversion in prediction markets and its effect on the relationship between prices and traders' beliefs.
And what exactly is risk aversion in prediction markets?
Well, risk aversion is a behavioral characteristic of choice under uncertainty. So when people are making choices that have uncertain outcomes, risk aversion is typically a factor in explaining those choices or understanding them. It goes back, it has quite a long history, and its origin as a research question had was based on a really interesting puzzle that was raised by Daniel Bernoulli in, I think it was 1738. But he examined something called the St. Petersburg paradox. And the St. Petersburg paradox is that if you have a sequence of coin flips that continues as long as you continue to get heads, and every time that you get a head, your earnings are going to be 2 to the power of n, where n is the number of heads, then you have a 1/2 chance of winning $2 and a 1/4 chance of winning $4 and a 1/3 chance of winning $8. So when you add up the expected winnings from that, it's infinity. So a risk-neutral trader would be willing to give up certainly everything that they have, all the money that they could ever get. If you ask Bill Gates how much he would pay to play that gamble, he should be willing to pay about $50 billion, or Warren Buffett should be willing to pay $60 billion. But even when you ask very wealthy people how much they'll pay for this gamble, they usually say, a few $100s. So there's got to be something else going on besides just an evaluation of the expected value of a gamble. So I thought that when I was looking at some of the explanations that were being proposed for pricing in prediction markets, risk aversion ought to be taken into account.
And what types of prediction markets do you use in your research? Election prediction markets, corporate prediction markets?
Well, anything that has typically a binary. I mean, my model was with a binary outcome, so it's something, or you could have a tertiary outcome. So it's something like the Republican Party candidate wins in 2016, the Democratic Party candidate wins, or some other party wins. So 3 possible outcomes. You can do the same thing with sporting contests. So you can have a gamble or a prediction market over the winner of the World Series, or you can have prediction markets for, which of a group of stocks will perform best over a particular time period. It can be used for a variety of purposes, usually where there are a small finite number of outcomes at a determined date, so that there's a clear way of assessing what the outcome of the bet is.
And what's the difference between a vote share market and a winner-take-all market?
So vote share markets are, for example, in the upcoming election, the way they usually do it is they take the 2 primary party candidates, or the 2 main party candidates, the Democrat and the Republican, and they total up the votes for those 2 candidates, and then each person's, so for example, going back to, I think it was 2012, when you look at Obama versus Romney, Obama had about 52% of the votes that those two candidates earned. And then the asset in the prediction market for the vote share market would pay 52 cents if you owned the Obama asset, and it would have paid 48 cents if you owned the Romney asset. The winner take all market, the person who has who wins the electoral vote would pay $1, and the other one would pay 0. So they're kind of measuring different things. One's measuring who you expect, or what the expectation is of how much of the vote each person will win, and the other one is who will actually win. And it would seem like those are unrelated, or that there's not a really definite relationship between those two questions. But there's a really interesting one, which is that people could believe that Obama's going to win 52% of the popular vote, but be very uncertain about that outcome. And in that case, the vote share market might, the winner-take-all market might have a price of about 0.6, but they could also be very certain about that outcome, and then the vote share market could be at 52, and the winner-take-all market could be at 90 cents or 95 cents.
So what's the benefit of using both types of markets instead of just one type?
Well, you get different information. You get complementary information from the winner-take-all market. And a good example of this is when you go back through the data from some of these markets. I was looking recently at the 2008 election between Obama and McCain. And on about the 1st of September, the vote share market had Obama at about 54 cents, and the winner-take-all market had him at about 60 cents, which said that they were, people believed Obama was going to win, but they also were very uncertain about that outcome. Then by about the 1st of October, that had gone to about 70 cents for the winner-take-all market without much movement in the vote share market. So it was still about 54 cents in the vote share and about 70 in the winner-take-all. And then by the 1st of November, it was up to about 85 or 90 cents in the winner-take-all market, and still at about 54 in the vote share market. And I think partly what that reflects is that people were becoming more certain about the outcome, but there's also a lot less time for surprises, a lot less time for one of the candidates to really bumble, or for some really unexpected news to come out about a candidate, or even something like a health care or a health issue to arise for a candidate.
Or an October surprise of some type, right?
Yeah,
some
yeah.
Kind of external factor.
In general, the uncertainty is kind of getting resolved as you get closer to that horizon when the election takes place.
Does one? That's fascinating. Does one dovetail polling numbers better than the other?
Well, the vote share market would be more like a poll, because a poll is asking people what they intend to do. It doesn't actually ask them who they expect to win.
Right.
And the vote share market is getting something very similar to that. It doesn't ask them who they intend to vote for, but it asks them what percentage of people they expect to vote for a particular candidate. So those are very closely related. The winner-take-all market is quite different from both of those. So just to reiterate, in a poll, a person is asked what they intend to do, and in a vote share market, they're asked what they think other people will do.
Right.
But both are looking for a percentage of the population that's going to vote for one particular candidate.
So prediction markets, let's talk about markets other than election results. They're used in various other aspects of society by corporations, by governments. Are there any non-election prediction markets you know of that use a model similar to the vote share prediction market as opposed to winner take all?
Right offhand, I can't think of anything that's exactly analogous. I know that in a lot of sporting contests, people will be asked, you might have markets running simultaneously that ask somebody, they offer a spread for a football game, say the spread is 7.5 points, and if say the Broncos beat the Seahawks by 8 points or more, then the Broncos wins. They've beaten the spread. But you could have another type of market running simultaneously, which is that it's just straight up the winner, and then you would ask the person, or the market would adjust the odds. So the odds might be 3-2 in favor of the Broncos in that case, where they have a positive spread. And that means that you're going to win less if you bet for the Broncos and they win. So that's getting at the same kind of idea about looking for multiple points on multiple aspects of a distribution. And this is an area that I think it's potentially kind of fruitful because it gets at these underlying questions of what the distribution of traders' beliefs looks like.
So let's talk about the where your curiosity is taking you. What's the most interesting aspect of prediction markets with unanswered questions as far as you're concerned? What intrigues you the most here?
Well, one problem that I worked on recently was based on an old psychological experiment that a guy named Ward Edwards did at the University of Michigan back in the 60s. So he had something that he called the book bag and poker chip paradigm. And in it, there were 2 bags of poker chips. One had 700 blue and 300 red, and the other one had 700 red and 300 blue. And he would take poker chips out and show them to the class. And they had to, slide actually like it's kind of like they had a slider that had little discs on it, and those would indicate their probabilities. Now you would probably just do it with clickers. You'd ask people to submit their belief. But the idea is that a market is supposed to aggregate everybody's beliefs. It's supposed to take all the information that people have and put it together into a market price. So what we did was we gave different people draws from one of these bags full of poker chips, and tested to see whether their beliefs were aggregated or if the market price reflected the aggregate of the information that people had. It really doesn't, and it didn't in Edwards' design either. So Edwards' design is a test of Bayes' theory of probability updating, and what he found was that people are very, very slow to update beliefs on the basis of incoming information. And we found that the market helped, but not a lot.
It's fascinating.
So So that's kind of an interesting contrast to the generally positive perspective that people have on prediction markets. I mean, it's a very complicated issue. Apparently, people have to have pretty close to correct beliefs for the markets to work well. And somehow they've generally come to have those in election markets, probably because there's a saturation of information.
Is that why you think?
It could be why. I would be, there's a lot of room for new research in this area.
This has been fascinating. Do we have any questions from the audience at all? No. Okay. Speaking to the traders who are watching this, what is your advice to them? First of all, let me ask you: are you a trader in PredictIt?
I have traded on the prediction markets. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
One thing, one thing that's one behavioral characteristics that you find in these markets and in betting markets in general is the favorite long shot bias.
Talk to us about that.
And so the favorite long shot bias says that on average, favorites are underpriced and long shots are overpriced, which has been a long-standing puzzle in prediction markets and in betting markets. Going back, I've seen papers going back, I think, into the early 70s regarding the prevalence of this characteristic of market prices. So it's kind of interesting how you figured this out. The way that you do this is you look at all of the, say all the prediction markets where the final price is, say, between 70 and 75 cents. And what you would, if the markets were doing a really good job, you would expect then that the asset involved in that would win 70 to 75% of the time. But typically they win more often than that. So those favorites have been underpriced. And then if you look at it for the long shots, those have been overpriced by the market. So that's something that, it's readily exploitable, but like a lot of behavioral characteristics in markets, if it were successfully exploited by enough people, it would go away. And then the result would be that the markets would work even better.
What is it about human nature that causes the distortion? Especially on the long shots.
There are a lot of explanations. One of the most puzzling results that I had in my paper on prediction markets is that that's just the equilibrium outcome. Behavioral economists have been promoting ideas that it comes from risk-seeking behavior, which seems intuitive since the long shot is the riskier asset. They've also suggested that perhaps it comes from distorted beliefs that aren't reflective of the true outcome that's going to occur. But what I found is that if people have correct beliefs and they're risk averse, then this is the outcome from the market, from the equilibrium of the market. And that's a very curious result, and to some extent the behavioral economists haven't addressed that concern or that issue.
That's just terrific. Listen, Stephen, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been really informative for me.
Thank you for inviting me to participate.
Good. Well, and a note to PredictIt traders, if you have suggestions on or feedback for us, send it to events@predictit.org. Again, thank you, Dr. Stephen Gjerstad, for this fascinating conversation. and we'll be checking back in with you closer to the election. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, John.